everyone. We are halfway through the semester. From this lecture toward the end, we are entering the second part of the course, which is data science. Part of this is going to be learning how to interact with files and folders on the computer from inside the Python program. Think of this lecture as a break from the fancy Python data structure in concepts. But this lecture is also an important one, and you will learn important functions and built-in methods for working with files and folders. For example, you will learn how to open files, write data to them, read the data backend, and so on. So basically, all the things you expect to do with files. And that's what we're going to take a look at it in this lecture. Let's see some examples of this. Text files are probably the most common and pervasive format of data. They can contain almost anything. Weather data, stock market activity, literally works, and raw web data. Text files are also convenient for your own work. When some kind of analysis has finished, it's nice to dump the results into a file you can inspect later. So let's jump into it. Let's start with something simple. Say text version of Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland that you can see here. Let's walk through the code line by line. First, we have a call to function open. So here we open the file and then we read the contents and we print those contents and we close it. And when I run it, I have this line. What about this function, open? So here we have two arguments. The first argument is the file path. Here is the file path, and we can separate them by this slash. And then we have the mode of the file, how we want to open it. This R means we want to read the file. Then here, after we open the file, then we put the contents by read function. And then here we print the contents. This 71 means 71 character of this. What about if I just print 99 characters of this one so you can see the content? What if I don't put any characters and I just say that, okay, print the contents of the file so you can see all the contents of the file. See how it shows it. All right, and next part is file object.close. So this one closes the file reference, and it's better to just close the file. Don't underestimate the value of this statement because there are weird errors that can pop up when you forget to close file description. What if we forget to close the file that we've already opened? There is a better way to read a file. This is with open as a file name, file object, and then we can read the contents. Okay, when we use read function, it reads all the file. What if we just want to read some lines of the file? This is another way. With open as file object, and then the number of lines that's been assigned 0 to this, and then we go through it by a loop for line of text in file object, and then we print line of text dot strip. Instead of read function, we use strip, and we read some of the lines, and it reads 5 lines of this file, and it prints that. All right, there is another function that we can use, and this is read lines. Read lines is instead of read function. That gives us some lines of this one. and we can refer to each line by an index. As you can see, print lines of text 0, it only gives us the first line of the file.
We can also write to files using the open function. We will use Python's open function to get a file object to create a text file. We can apply method write to write data to that file. As a result, text will be written to the file. We can create the file example2.txt as follows. We use the open function. The first argument is the file path. This is made up of the file name. If you have that file in your directory, it will be overwritten, and the file directory. We set the mode parameter to W for writing. Finally, we have the file object. As before, we use the with statement. The code will run everything in the indent block, then close the file. We create the file object, file1. We use the open function. This creates a file example2.txt in your directory. We use the method write to write data into the file. The argument is the text we would like input into the file. If we use the write method successively, each time it's called, it will write to the file. The first time it is called, we will write, this is line A with a /n to represent a new line. The second time we call the method, it will write, this is line B, then it will close the file. We can write each element in a list to a file. As before, we use a with command and the open function to create a file. The list lines has 3 elements consisting of text. We use a for loop to read each element of the first lines and pass it to the variable line. The first iteration of the loop writes the first element of the list to the file example2. The second iteration writes the second element of the list, and so on. At the end of the loop, the file will be closed. We can set the mode to appended using a lowercase a. This will not create a new file, but just use the existing file. If we call the method write, it will just write to the existing file, then add, this is line C, then close the file. We can copy one file to a new file as follows. First, we read the file example1 and interact with it via the file object, read file. Then we create a new file example3 and use the file object, write file to interact with it. The for loop takes a line from the file object, read file, and stores it in the file example3 using the file object, write file. The first iteration copies the first line. The second iteration copies the second line till the end of the file is reached. Then both files are closed.
If you find yourself in a situation of writing to a file multiple times and wanting to keep what you wrote to the file previously, then you're in the market for appending to a file. Here you can see that with open, when we use open function, the mode is A, which means appending to a file that's already exists.
Python already knows about files inherently, so you don't need to import any classes to work with them. I'm going to start with calling the open function. So to open a file, I call the open function, and it takes 2 arguments. The first is the file to operate on, and the second argument is the kind of access that you want. So in this example, I'm opening dilaram.txt for write access because of the W parameter. And when the function returns, I'm storing the file object in the file_object variable. Now that the file is open, let's write some lines of data. For I in a range of 10, I'm going to take the file object variable called the write function on it, and I'll just write some text. So the write function writes the data to the file, which in this case is just a series of lines. And then the file needs to be closed. So I'll call file underscore object close when we're done. So we open the file, write some data onto the file, and then we close it. So let's run this. If we go back to our file list, we see a dilarum.txt file, which did not exist before. And if we open it, you can see here are the lines that we just wrote. So now let's try adding some content to the file that we just wrote. So I'm going to comment out the line that opens the file and creates it, and I'm going to write a new one. And this will be file object equals open, and it's going to be again dilarum.txt. And in this case, I'm going to pass a different mode to it, which is A. The A parameter means to append data to the end of the file instead of overwriting all the existing content that's already in there. The rest of the code will remain the same, which essentially means that 10 new lines will be added to the existing file. So we run this and check the file again, and you can see that 10 new lines have been added to the end. So let's close this. For the last example here, we're going to read the file contents. Now there's a couple of ways that you could do this. First, I need to open the file for read access. I'll just simply change this A to an R and then use the read function to read the entire file contents and to print them out. So I'll write contents equal file object.read and then print contents. You can see here that the contents of the file is being printed. You can also read the contents of the file line by line. If you have a really large file, sometimes it doesn't make sense to read the whole thing in, especially if all you want is maybe a small piece of the contents. So the read lines function is useful for this. So in this case, I'm reading the content as an array of individual lines and then printing them.
Python has an OS module that's very powerful. There are tons of utilities in this module, and I encourage you to work on this lecture carefully and try manipulating files using the operating system's shell utilities. To wrap up,